Live.
All right. Okay. So, we're super pumped and excited for episode 5. I wrote on the status and the promo for this. That was episode 4. I'm already losing my mind on all of these online episode pieces, but we're excited. We're pumped about what's going to happen here. Tansego Magantik and How Konabi. I'd like to say welcome to everybody. This is going to be Lunchtime Decolonization. Of course, Curtis Vinish, myself, and we have a special guest with us, Michael Linklater. Um, you want to know about Michael Linklater? I can't read the bio. It's too long. There's too many accomplishments. It just goes on and on and on. So I'm going to ask you all to just Google Michael Linklater's name, and find some of those. Donald Trump has tweeted about him. Trudeau talks about him. So there's a large contingent of stuff that you can find. But in all seriousness, Mike is a leader in our Indigenous community. He's done amazing things. He has a strong background in his culture. He lives as an Indigenous person, first and foremost, raised by his parents in a really strong cultural background and understanding, and has helped and paved the way for a lot of youth to see themselves as being successful. So we're pumped to have Michael Linklater here with us. So I'm going to turn it over to him just to introduce himself.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen, for having me on. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and inviting me out today and be able to share some words with you guys.
Cool, man. Well, Mike. First question that we want to ask you is, what role has culture played in your success on and off the court?
For me, culture has been the foundation of who I am and everything that I've done. I remember years ago when I was quite a bit younger, I used to say that my culture was something that I brought with me everywhere I went, almost like it was kind of in a bag and something that I carried with me. But what I realized is that my culture is embedded in my very existence, and it's a part of me. It lives within me. So I really changed the vocabulary that I use in terms of bringing my culture with me. No, my culture is me. I am my culture. So I mean, I've been participating in ceremonies before I can remember. I was very fortunate for my mother. She gave me up at a very young age to my great aunt, and my great aunt and her husband Maria and the late Walter Linklater were the ones who raised me. They were both products of the residential school system, and they had gone through kind of the turmoil already and started dealing and facing with their demons, their issues. And they realized that going back to their culture was something that not only was it our traditional inherent spiritual right, but it was something that we needed as Indigenous people to move forward in this world. Was we can't lose track of where we came from, and where we came from in terms of our traditions, our ceremonies, and really what makes us us. And there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's really unfortunate that today within Saskatchewan we still deal with a lot of racism, and it's sad to me because if people really took the time to see how our ceremonies, how our community, and how we conduct ourselves through these traditional ways of life. And when I say traditional ways of life, I don't necessarily meaning like with some people across the world, like through my travels, like they seriously still ask, like, do you guys live in teepees and igloos? So I don't mean that tradition. What I mean is these ceremonies, these ways of life, in terms of just like, in abundance. In Cree, I was asking my mom if there was a word for greed. There's no word in Cree for greed because it didn't exist. If you had an abundance of something, you shared it. So, those are traditions that we carry with us and that we need to carry with us today. And when you look at a lot of the protests that happen for Indigenous people, it's with those in mind and those in heart. The land through treaties was never sold, it was never given, because our leaders at that time believed that, and to this day we still believe this, that the land is not ours to give. It was here for us to take care of, because then in turn it would take care of us. So those teachings having those ceremonies and knowing that I had something to always fall back on anytime I dealt with adversity or difficult times. I always knew where I could go in order to get the strength that I needed to move forward.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's a lot of things in there. I think your story resonates with a lot of Indigenous communities and family, different people, myself included. As when I was just a young child, about 6 to 9 months, I had this severe burn on my hand, and what that did is that was a ticket to being raised by my grandmother, and taken out of an environment that wasn't healthy or wasn't safe for me. And really, truly, what I see in retrospect is that is one of the best things that ever happened for me in my life, is just for that. So every time that I look down and I see this massive scar on my hand, I see it as this blessing and this ticket that allowed me to have a better life and allowed me to really connect to who I was as an Indigenous person. And I heard you talk about, some of that, and talk about that whole thing for yourself. What I want to just kind of touch on, I mean, that's so important and valuable. But what I want to touch on is you spoke a little bit about, going back and relying on our culture, relying on our traditions to get us through some of those difficult times. We see the success, we see national championship, we see all of this amazing things that you're doing. And from the outside looking in, it looks easy. It looked like that was a simple path for you, straight path, and, Auntie Maria, and they set that stage up for you and make it easy for you. But it wasn't. You want to just talk about some of those difficult times, talk about, I know that the culture and ceremony you got through, but for those of us that are attaching ourselves to it, if it's music, if it's dance, if it's playing ball, it's a combination of all those things that get us through those really, excuse my language, I know there's kids watching, really shitty times in our lives in order to make it through. So just, maybe share and touch on some of those things, and, and how you're able to overcome, because there's kids right now that are in the inner city that only see one option, and that's gangs, that's crime, and for some, they only see another option where it's suicide, that they are encountering these difficult things. Talk about those and how you've overcome those and how you've made space for yourself. And more importantly, trudging through all of the crap that we have to deal with in terms of racism, ignorance, all of the stuff that exists in our lives, so that your children have an easier path to follow. Just touch on that if you can.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost to acknowledge right now at this time is, for anybody right now out there that is struggling, that is going through something, what you have to recognize is that it is okay to not be okay. And I think that's something that we really struggle with, as not only as Indigenous people, but as human beings, as humanity. When we see something that is difficult ahead of us, or that when we're facing something, it's like, I'm not okay right now. And then because we have this preconception or this notion that because we have a fear of this unknowing, we don't know what's going to happen because we're in this state, that it's not okay to be in this state right now. And so I think first and foremost, you have to acknowledge that you're not okay, and that it's okay to not be okay, because then that kind of brings a bit of normalcy to it. And then from there is when you start working through some of the difficulties that you're facing. So for me, what I've gone through is I've worked through a lot of my stuff in private, while I'm going through crisis, while I'm going through difficulties. Even like I'll mention, like me and my kid's mom, like we share our children half time. So they're with me for half time a week. They go back to their mom half time for a week. But while we were in our relationship together, like there was a lot of, crap that I put her through. And I didn't actually acknowledge this until this pandemic hit. I always told myself, oh yeah, I kind of sugarcoated it. But for me, it was me being able to take on this responsibility right now for all the stuff that I did and put her through. And through this pandemic, I was able to actually sit down with her, and we've been on great terms for several years, but I've never actually taken onus and owned all of the crap that I put her through. So I'm very grateful. I had a great cry with her. So I did that stuff in private. So being able to do that in private, and then once you've worked through that, to be able to share that in public. I mean, being kind of a public person, there's a lot of people, like you say, that kind of look to me and seeing what's going on, or you just see this image. But there is a lot of things, that I've gone through personally, privately with my family, and to be able to have the tools and the resources to work through a lot of the issues, the adversities that we face personally, publicly, is something that we have to work towards acquiring. A lot of people, for myself, like I grew up in the inner city. Saskatoon is known for a lot of different things, but kind of in the inner city of Saskatoon has a bad rap. There's poverty, there's homelessness, prostitution, gangs, violence, all of these things. And I was a kid that grew up in this environment. I think one of the things that I have to acknowledge and give credit to is that I did have the stability at home, where there was culture there. And so going out, a lot of my friends didn't have that. They didn't have those supports at home. So acknowledging that. And I had a very close friend who ended up passing away, the late Kevin Moccasin, when I think we were about 21 years old. And he was somebody that me and him, we just connected. And I was able to kind of provide that support for him. We had other friends through the inner city that didn't necessarily gravitate towards as much to us. And so they got themselves into more trouble. So I think growing up in the inner city and thinking, well, I only have this way, it's really who you surround yourself with is really going to determine where you're going to end up in life. And something that really resonated with me recently was that if you are in a not so great situation, whether it's personally, whether it's with somebody else, if you do not change or decide to change that situation, you're choosing that situation that you're not liking. And that's something that really hit home with me just recently, because a lot of the times we sit in these difficult situations or these personal struggles, and we say we don't like it, or I don't, whatever the case may be, but we don't do anything to change that. And so by not acting on that, or by not changing our situation, what we inadvertently do is choose that situation. And so for me, that hit home. But a lot of the struggles I do have them, are done in private, and they're done not where we see a lot of our people, they spill all of their stuff out on social media. And then it's just tough, because then people have, I don't want to say judgments, but along the lines of people, I don't want to even say shaming them, but kind of along those lines of judging and shaming. But when we start to do that, because I've been guilty of doing it myself, and I've had to look at myself. And one of the things I love doing personally through life is asking why, what makes me tick, or why do I do certain things that I do? Growing up my entire life, like here's an example, I was always scared of failure, failure in terms of somebody telling me no. As simple as me saying, hey, can I come over later and hang out? And you saying no to me, I always wondered, why was I so fearful of that? And so doing the self-work and doing my own research, what I realized was children that are not raised by their biological parents have this subconscious fear of rejection. Because what happened when we were children, we were abandoned by the person who should have loved us most, which are our parents. So you subconsciously carry that through life. And this is me doing that personal work in private, understanding, well, it's okay for people to say no, so that having that fear of rejection stems from the unhealed child within me. And life is constant work. Like, we want to continue to work on ourselves throughout life. I'm 37 years old. In September, I'm going to be 38, and still continuing to work on bettering myself. There's a lot of things that I've done throughout my entire life that have been difficult, have been the wrong decisions, But if we don't learn from those wrongdoings, then we're not bettering ourselves from those difficult situations. So it all ties back though to having culture as a foundation. And a lot of our people lost touch with their ceremonies, with their spirituality, with that way of life because of residential school. We all know this. And now there's people out there that really want to get back in touch with that way of life, and they've never had it. So being able to reach out and find those tools. Growing up, I seen a lot of people come into my house where my parents really did a lot of work, you know, and they did their personal work. My late father was an alcoholic for, 35 years of his life. So for him to be able to do that work before he ventured into his spirituality and culture to start sharing and helping other people, was a tremendous feat that he had to do. So again, me doing that same work, other people needing to do that work so they can go out and be able to share. Because for me, my entire life, I've been drug and alcohol free. If I was secretly a closet drinker or secretly did drugs on the side, there's no way that I could come forth and say, hey, don't do drugs, don't drink or whatever, because then that's hypocritical of me. So for us as public people or people that want to help, we've got to make sure that we are helping ourselves first. Because one of the things I heard my mom say was it was inadvertently, or actually when I think back about it, she was, we were at a culture camp. She was doing a woman's circle, and I was walking by the kitchen, which is where they were sitting or gathering for their circle to get water. And as I walked by, I heard her say to the women, she said, you women need to stop looking to men for love, and you need to love yourself. And that really hit with me, because when I shared that, I was like, this goes for men too. Like us men, we need to stop looking for somebody else to love us, and we need to love ourselves first. And what I'm coming to terms with is there's been times in my life where I didn't love myself like I should have, so we got to continue to work through those things so we can able to help and heal. And how we heal the world, how we heal our country, Turtle Island, is we start with ourselves first.
Wow, thank you for those powerful words, Mike. I think especially as a young man myself and someone you that I look up to, hearing those things and being open to talk about relationships, to talk about your own healing journey, also gives me motivation and also inspiration to continue that work. Because personally, coming from a single parent home, not having a father there was the dynamic for me. And so I've kind of like you said, you're kind of seeking out that in other relationships or in other places to find that and to be okay with yourself and, heal that inner child. And I think as men, those are the discussions that we need to have. And as a teacher and as an educator, bring that into the classroom, especially at the front lines of Indigenous education of, starting these healing conversations. And then getting on to some of the teachings you shared, like about loving yourself. That's, I think, one of the biggest things. A lot of our young people, you'll see them with their heads down, hood up, hat on, hiding their faces all the time. And, that's just such a sign of a low self-esteem. And, to how can we bring, self-confidence back into our young people, and is bringing them back and giving them opportunities to learn about their culture, to learn the true history of their ancestors, to learn their language, to be around elders. And I think when it comes to education, that's been my passion, and I know Chris's passion, and I know some of the work that you do as well. So thank you for those words. And so you have been a pillar of success with basketball, and now in Thunderchild and in different business initiatives. Mr. Nike, Mr. Swoosh. I'm still waiting on my shoes, by the way. But what advice do you have for Indigenous people striving for success? If it's either in academics, if it's sports, if it's business, what would you say to them?
For me, when I always think about kind of this question, it always starts with, again, self. And again, just like kind of touching back on your comments there, loving yourself first. A lot of my success came from being okay with who I was. And so, like you talk about a lot of these young people that come in with the hoods on, and what that stems from is a lot of insecurities, and we become a product of our upbringing. So it's important that we acknowledge those, and when we're around people like that, doing our best to really uplift their spirits. I know, education is a very, very important tool that we all have, or that we all should be striving for. But you as educators, the importance that you guys have and the role that you have, I know everybody out there can recall a situation where they had a teacher that gave them some encouraging words or that really helped them. So to be able to, in that educating role, to be able to help uplift those young people. But for me, again, it comes down to self. So you kind of got to look at yourself. And one of the sayings that I have is, the only person who can stop you from achieving your goal is yourself. And so when you think about that, a lot of us, I guess, through being colonized, we're so dependent on these handouts or certain things that people should be giving to us or that they owe us. When all in reality, nobody owes you anything. The only person that owes somebody something is you owing to yourself. And if you want to take it a step further, we as young Indigenous people, what we owe it to is our residential school survivors, for all of the torment that they went through for us to be here today, for the ceremonies that they were able to keep in secret so they can pass it down to us. Like, we owe it to them to make sure that we take the time and the effort to seek out those ceremonies so that we can pass it down to our next generation. Taking it a step further, to our war veterans who gave their lives, who sacrificed, so that we could be free. We can take it there and say we owe it to them, but really it's owing it to ourselves. And even further, our leaders who dealt with European settlement, who were forced into treaties, who fled from treaties, like through that generation. So the fact that we're here sitting here talking on this technology is a blessing, and that's through the sacrifice of all those generations before us. So we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we strive for what we want in life. There's a lot of things, a lot of people out there are not athletes. A lot of people out there hate basketball. So what you can do is take the same principles and apply it to what you're passionate about, whether it's education, getting the highest form of education that you can, whether it's a specialty field, going out there and doing the best through that field. But a lot of us that do, when I think about some of our most vulnerable, some of the people that are in those very difficult situations, those are the ones that I think about. And when the people who are in those really, really tough situations, we need to be able to extend those arms of support for them and to help guide them. But again, the saying, you can show somebody the door, but they're the ones that have to walk through it. There's been our elders, the Kiteak, and the way they share these stories and tell us what we need to do or what we should be doing. They're sharing that with us because they want to see us succeed. And you as educators, you do the same thing with a lot of the youth that you work with a lot of the young people you work with. You see some of the struggles they went through. All of us sitting here, we've all been broke students. We know what they go through. We've all had hard boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, girlfriend-girlfriend, boyfriend-boyfriend. There's a lot of different dynamics, and even for the community of people that can't even express themselves of who they are truly in terms of the way they identify themselves. And that's a whole other different ballgame. So just making sure that we're there in terms of support for them. But again, it starts with self. Like, we really, again, like through this whole pandemic, I needed to take a break from social media, and I felt like I was constantly on a plane. I was constantly traveling. I was going to different communities, and I didn't realize, that I was almost in a type of survival mode, the way I'd been operating. And I remember kind of like the first 2 weeks, I was sleeping like 10 plus hours. Didn't realize how tired I was. And then for my own mental health, like seeing all this stuff and then the uncertainty. So I just kind of really needed to bring myself back to center. And so once I was able to do that, being able to work through some of my stuff through this pandemic, I was able to say, okay, I think I got some stuff figured out and sorted here. I think now I'm ready. So from deactivating my social media accounts to reactivating and saying, you know, I think I have some stuff to share. I'm ready to share. And then what happens? Through the laws of attraction in the universe, within a day, I get several calls for several different interviews to kind of share. So it's interesting how the universe works when we continue to stay in tune with ourselves. And again, coming back to self and working on self, if you can't help yourself, you can't help anybody else. So, and even for as many flights as I've been on in my life, the safety procedure is you put your mask on first before you help someone else. So again, once we're in tune with ourselves and once we figure out, you know, the things that we need to work through and continue to work through that, what we'll be able to do is really really make change. And the way I talk about us helping ourselves, I view it as in our medicine wheel in the 4 quadrants: mind, body, spirit, emotion. And so you think about somebody that is just right on awesome culture person. I have somebody, I won't mention their name, but they do tremendous amount of ceremony, but they weren't taking care of their physical health. And so now they just went through a severe health issue. So now the most important thing we have in life is our health and our happiness. You know, without those two, nothing else matters. So if we're not taking care of our physical self, of our mental self, you know, all of these things are going to fall to the wayside. And I look at it as a wheel turning. If you have one of those quadrants missing, like let's say your spirituality or your emotions, especially us as men, you know, we tend not to shy away from our emotions and not want to dive into that. Like the way our wheel will roll is with a little bit of a hitch in it because one of those quadrants is missing. So if we have 2 of those things missing, let's say our physical and our emotional, now we just have half a circle. So we're going to get rolling, then it's going to come to a stop. You know, that's something that I share when I go out and I share these discussions, because when we think of health, you know, some of us might only attach that to one thing, like our spiritual health or our physical health, but it's holistic. So yeah, just like kind of, I guess, might have rambled on a bit there, but really getting back to your question is really just making sure that we're taking care of ourselves and working through those things. And then once you deal with adversity or bumps or hiccups in the road, you'll be able to roll through those or over them a little bit more efficiently if we're whole rather than not.
Yeah, you know, that's again such great thought process. One thing that was going through my mind when I'm listening to you talk is that you're talking about decolonization without using the word decolonization, and that means decolonization is different to every single human being. Decolonization for that kid that's sitting in the classroom with this hood up, that's not having that confidence that our ancestors had. Decolonization for that kid is taking his hood off and sitting up proudly and being proud of who he is. Somebody else to decolonize is to look at how they're addressing and healing themselves through their through healthy and active lifestyles. You know, like there's a whole bunch of different thought processes there, and thank you for sharing that. We're getting to the end of our time here. You know, we don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to just kind of touch a little bit on. I mean, there are so many initiatives that you've done. There's so many different things that you've been a part of, and I know that a lot of them are really dear to your heart. A lot of them are really important to you, and you travel, and you're asked to travel around the world. And you know what you said about just being on the planes and traveling. I don't travel as much as you, but I do travel quite a bit. And this pandemic slowed it all down and allowed me to just kind of reflect and take a breath, you know, and just kind of like be immersed in my children's lives and my family's lives and my home, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So it is a blessing in that sense. And I know I've mentioned that a few times. So I know exactly what you're saying, and you know what you're talking about. But I did want to just kind of mention, we talk about bullying, you know, like a little bit like that. And one of the most viewed sessions that we've done is I did a session with my son about braiding his hair and the importance of hair for us as Indigenous men. And one day, Curtis, you know, he'll grow his hair out, you know, he'll have a braid, you know. a little bit. It's coming, hockey here. But just, we think about bullying, it knows no bounds. Like, who the heck in the world is ever going to bully Michael Linklater? That's something that we don't think about. But you've endured that just by showcasing your pride and your culture and your identity through your long hair, and you've made a really important initiative with Boys with Braids that took off, and it's I just recently seen a video from a young man that's doing some of that work, and really initiated from some of that original thought that you started. So you just want to talk about maybe a little bit about that, or some of the other things that you're currently doing and moving forward while we almost close off.
Yeah, Boys with Braids, I think that came about in about 2013, and just seeing the outpour on social media, a lot of the things that people were dealing with and sharing, what their sons were going through, is something that hit home with me, because as a child, I was teased and bullied for having long hair, because I've had long hair since I was a baby. And then in my own boys, like my own children, they 20 years later, they're going through the same thing that I went through. And so seeing that happen, it was really, I'm kind of an action person. I like to think of myself as, so when people have issues, I guess, like really taking action and finding a solution to it. And I realized that there needed to be a collective voice, and there needed to be some type of gathering to help, one, bring to the forefront that this is an issue that a lot of young men deal with, this teasing and bullying. Two, help them to become proud of who they are. Just like you said, take off that hood and sit up tall, for having long hair, because we've been shamed for so long for just wanting to be proud of who we are as Indigenous people. And then the last was to just make sure that the general public knew the significance of why we grew our hair. So just having those supports, and a really interesting thing about Boys with Braids is my late father. I asked the proper way with Shtema to have a pipe ceremony, and gave it the blessings of those traditional ways. Right, when a lot of people who are familiar with treaties on our side, we know that the pipe, there was a pipe ceremony before treaties were signed, and we believe that's what continued the strength of those treaties. And so for us, the same thing, having this gathering, nobody has ownership over it. I'm being kind of called the founder. Boys with Braids has taken on its own spirit, and there's been gatherings as far as Ottawa with Thielen. He's the one doing those videos right now, which is amazing. And as far as New Mexico, California, so every community can host a gathering within their own. So that's something. But I got to give a lot of credit to Cecil out in Winnipeg. He's the one that brought it online for the masses, and has been a huge support for a lot of people to kind of reach out to. And just kind of with other initiatives, like really all I'm doing is things that I'm passionate about. And for a lot of young people who are watching today, even people who are well into their lives, you heard the old saying, sometimes if you want something done, you need to do it yourself. For a lot of young people, I remember when I was young, I think, oh, this would be cool if we had this, or this would be great if we had that, not realizing that I had the power to actually make it happen. So I think once we realize that as people, and especially as young people, that you have the power to make things happen, and your options are boundless.
No, for sure. And I have, before we finish off, I have one bonus question. What is your favorite memory about basketball, playing basketball? Was it your Rattlers? Is it university? Is it FIBA? Which one?
There's three memories that jump out, and I'll briefly touch on them. One was winning the national championship with the Huskies, first ever. Both of my parents were in the stands. I'll probably say that was probably the most that was near and dear to my heart, because both of my parents who raised me were in the stands, so they got to share that experience. I ran up to the stands. I gave them both a hug. I started crying. I thanked them profusely for all of the hours they dedicated and money that they had spent on me to become successful in that sport. That's probably the one that's most near and dear to my heart. Winning the CEBL championship was awesome. I was in a different role. I didn't play as much. So that was special because it was the first ever, and my mom was there, but I had lost my father. So having him there in spirit was something sweet. But when I represented Team Canada at the World Cup for 3x3 basketball, that was something that was really special to me, because that was the first ever Canadian 3x3 men's national team. And to be a part of that and to do very well there, to be an Indigenous person, was something that I was really proud of. So yeah, those would probably be my top three.
Very cool. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Thank you for taking the time and volunteering, and coming forward and just stepping up on this podcast. One of the really unique things, about you, and every time that I've asked you to, support the work that we do, without a doubt, you've done it. You've come forward. When I went forward, I want to just mention this as before we go, but one of the most there's times when you get to meet and talk with different people, but when we went to go visit your mom and offered her tobacco to come and speak at Think Indigenous, and those of you that her speech is online, and I do ask everybody to go check it out because it's phenomenal. But just you being there and supporting that conversation and standing with me as we asked her was always something that I hold dear, and appreciate always your support for not only for the work for our youth, but the work for our communities. It's and it goes to a national and a global level, and that when we look at when we were looking at those national basketball games, when we were watching the Huskies in the finals and seeing the captain, the leader of that team on the court with long hair, knowing that kid is proud, that person is proud of who he is as a Cree person, standing on there, leading that stage and being center of that. My son was standing there and super proud of that, and super proud that he knows who you are and knows that piece. So all of that is the thoughts and prayers of your mom, your late dad, and our ancestors coming into reality. So on behalf of the Think Indigenous team and our episode, Lunchtime Decolonization, we want to say thank you for sharing. Want to say thank you for all the work that you've done and continue to do. And we look forward to see what's next. So hi. And I think we're pretty much closed almost.
All right. Thanks, guys.